The EU Parliament is set to vote on ratifying the Paris Agreement on climate change. If approved, it could be the tipping point to seal the deal. In order for the agreement to become binding, countries producing at least 55% of global emissions need to commit. 62 countries have pledged their support so far, but they represent just under 52% of emissions. The EU would add another 12%. And if the European Parliament backs the measure, the Paris Agreement would become law after 30 days. Let's get more on the story and speak to the Director of Climate Action Network Europ, Wendel, who is live for us in Brussels. Many thanks for joining us, Wendel.
My pleasure.
Now, I understand there were months of internal wrangling between a number of European countries to come to some sort of agreement. So is it likely to be voted through today?
I think it's extremely likely that the European Parliament will vote positively on the ratification of the Paris Agreement. And that is because there's broad support in Europe for the agreement. It's only that the speed in which this ratification process has happened over the past months has really surprised Europe. They weren't ready for this kind of broad support from other countries around the world.
So it was under pressure after countries like China and India, for example, gave their support.
Yes, very much. The EU was still living in the era that they were kind of acting alone on climate change and the others were following, and that has now changed. Now it's the other countries like the US and China that are taking the lead, and Europe is trying to catch up.
So if it is passed through today by Europe, what will Europe's entry mean for the overall Paris climate deal process?
So, I mean, it will mean indeed that the threshold will be reached, even while not all of the EU member states will have ratified. So not all of their emissions will count, but it will be enough to reach the threshold of the 55%. And then it means that the Paris Agreement comes into force, very likely before the weekend. And it means that the first meeting of all those countries who are part of the Paris Agreement will then happen at the next UN climate conference, which takes place in Marrakesh in the middle of November.
I've heard that there are some concerns that even if the targets are met of this Paris Agreement, that it won't be enough to impact global warming. What is your response to that?
Yes, well, I think already in Paris, countries recognized that the high ambition that was set to keep temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius and even try to limit it to 1.5 degrees were very ambitious, and that the pledges that are currently on the table from all countries of the world would not be enough to reach that. So hence why within the Paris Agreement there is broad agreement from countries that they would do a revision process up till 2018 to see whether countries would be willing to improve the commitments they made and to make bigger emission reduction efforts towards 2030. And it's one of our questions to the European Union that after this ratification, they should now urgently start with the process of revising their 2030 target and see whether it's in line with the Paris Agreement so that they're ready with that process by the end of 2018.
Okay, many thanks for joining us today. Wendel from Climate Action Network Europe in Brussels.